Did that really fucking happen? Are you fucking kidding me? That's unreal.
There's this river bloke called Knuckles, some call him the Big Knuck, spinning stories tall and true that'll make you say,
Holy fuck!
The cities to the outback on the highway or the farm, crack a cold one with Knuckles and
Tell us a proper true yarn.
G'day, my name's Knuckles and welcome to the Proper True Yarn podcast, the show at which we extract the wildest and loosest yarns from a fair few critters and blokes and Sheilas out of, anywhere in the world really. So I think it's only fitting that we've got my old man TJ, the OG of the Proper True Yarn himself, a man that has told me a few and has a fair few up his sleeve. So I thought I'd get the old boy on for the first ever episode. So how you going, Dad?
Good on you, Knuckles. Mate, it's a pleasure to be here. I think it's a great thing, Proper True Yarns. I've told a lot over the years, and I hope I can entertain you well today with some good old bush yarns.
Perfect. So I think before we get into TJ's yarns, we're going to tell one about happened fucking this morning. Straight off the bat, we've hired this studio in Nambour. Anyway, it's like a double-coded system. You've got to put a code to get in the front door. Then we had to put a code to get in the second door. Anyway, the front door code worked, and the second door code, she wouldn't work. We tried. We had people here. Anyway, the bloke we've tried to hire it off. Apparently, he's in his back of stand or one of the stands, and couldn't get hold of him. So we just had to break into the fucking joint. So a bit of sort of back to our Nambour roots, I guess. And there's a couple of old junkies up the street give some tips, and we just send it and few knives and shivved our way in. So we're a bit late starting, but we're here front and centre. And so TJ, tell us a proper true yarn.
Okay, I'll kick off with a proper true yarn about a battler, bush battler. Had 5 little kids. His missus left him. He was struggling to pay the grocery bills on a labourer's wage. He's driving home from work. What's he find beside the road? A platypus that's been hit by a car. Poor old platypus is laying there, nearly dead. So he thinks that'll make a good feed for me and the kids tonight. So he takes the platypus home, cooks him up, feeds the family. Lo and behold, there's a bloody greenie conservationist comes along and reports him. So anyway, he goes to court, up before the judge. And the judge said, well, what's the situation? He said, well, I'm battler, Judge. He said, I'm trying to feed me 5 kids. I get labourer's wage. Things are tough, he said. So he said, I cooked him up and fed me family, he said. Judge said, well, he said, on that grounds, he said, I can't even consider convicting you on such an offence. I dismiss the charge. He said, when we finish here, he said, could I see you in my chambers, have a bit of a yarn? I've got a question for you. So he goes back to the judge's chambers. And the judge says, by the way, he said, what does platypus taste like? He said, well, not quite as good as koala. But he said, bloody hell of a lot better than dolphin.
Fucking proper true yarn. Done and done. Roll into the next one, TJ. Tell us the proper true yarn.
Well, actually, this was in the Tambo district many, many years ago. My stories are going to be true stories, proper true yarns of things that happen in the bush. And this poor old fellow, he had 8 kids. He was a roost shooter, battling and struggling in a government house, housing commission home. And the rules were you can only have 6 kids in your housing commission home. So one day the old health inspector arrives, knocks on the door. Mum comes out and he says, how many children are living in this house? And she said, well, there's 8. He said, well, the rules are, regulations, only 6 children, mum and dad, and only 6 kids allowed in the government house. He said, you got to only have 6. Okay. She said, I better get my husband. And he was a kangaroo shooter. So he comes around and, what's the problem? He said, there's 8 kids in this house, only allowed 6. He said, okay then, righto. Kids, line up on the front fence there. So the kids line up on the front fence. He says, the oldest girl, he said, go and get me 243 out of the Toyota. He said, so he gets the 243. Lines these kids up and they're shivering and shaking and squirming. So he get the 243 out and he sort of pointed at him. He said, well, I love yous all, he said. I don't know which 2 to shoot. He said, I love you all and you're my kids. I don't know which two to shoot. He turned to the health inspector and he said, here you are, he said, here's the gun. He said, you shoot the two that you don't want. And the health inspector threw the gun on the ground. He said, you're mad, you bastard, you're friggin' mad. And he took off in a great cloud of dust. And the old dad walked up and spoke to Mum on the front step. He said, Mum, that mad bastard won't be back again.
Done and done. Fucking hell.
Proper true yarn from the Tambo district.
And I can tell you, if he, TJ probably would have blew me straight off the fucking porch of the kid if he could have got anywhere near a gun. I would have been the first shot gone off the ranks.
Old Knuckles would have gone. He would have been straight, even on the ground.
What do you got next, TJ?
Oh, I got one about an old mate of mine, Peter Smith. He's a good mate of mine from Tambo. Peter, he was the CEO one time of the Shire in Tambo Council there. So this time the government decided to send out a conservationist. It was a professor lady from the environmental section to lecture the graziers on what they were doing wrong with the environment. So she got up and she had all these local graziers there and she's talking to them about the erosion and they're clearing too much timber and causing erosion and filling up the creeks and killing too many trees. And she's going on. She said, while I'm on this subject, she said, this 1080 baiting, killing the dingo, she said, that's got to cease. She said, that's no good. Dingo is a very important part of the ecology, she said, because the dingo, he eats vermin and scraps and rubbish, little snakes and lizards. She said, you can't kill your dingo. My old mate Peter got up and said, well, ma'am, he said, what do you think we should do with these dingoes? And she said, well, I'd suggest a castration program for all male dingoes. And he said, oh, okay. He said, well, it might be different. Your dingoes down there at Brisbane, he said, in the suburban areas, and it might be different, those old dingoes down there, but I can guarantee you one thing. Out in this Tambo district, those dingoes, they eat our lambs, they don't root them.
Al Smithy, he's a good man.
Yeah. He was a great fella.
He's a fucking great man, Smithy. Keep rolling, TJ.
I heard this woman the other day, she walked into the chemist shop in Charleville, and she said, I want some arsenic. And the chemist said, what do you want arsenic for? She said, I want to kill my husband. I want to kill him. Oh, he said, I'm very sorry, ma'am. He said, I can't give you arsenic, he said. She said, well, you have a look at this. So she showed him a phone. Here's a photograph of her husband and his wife in bed together. He said, oh, my God. He said, you didn't tell me you had a prescription.
Fuck, you're letting them roll today, Dad. Keep proper true yarns, Captain.
When I was out in the West, I worked in the far West, and there was a wild fellow out there by the name of Athol Prince, and a lot of people would have heard of him in Western Queensland. Old Prince, he's a big, sort of loud-talking, loud-mouthed fella. And I was there at this bloody golf club dance this night, and a little bloke working for me, a good little fella, Peter Moritz, and he's a pretty shy little bloke, and he wanted to get this girl up for a dance, but he wasn't quite game. And Big Athol comes in, ho, ho, ho. He said, what's going on, TJ? I said, I said, bloody young Peter here. I said, he'd like to get this girl up for a dance, but he's not quite game. And he said, well, I'll tell you, young fella, in big voice, I'll give you a bit of advice. And when he said that, everyone in the golf club just stopped talking. He said, you want to love her like a flower and she'll grab you by the stalk. Well, this young, he just bolted out the door. This little buddy Sheila, she took off like a scolded cat. She did straight off. So, yeah.
You'd have a few more properties about old Athol, TJ.
Oh, I've got a few more about him, yeah. I'll get into it later on. While I'm at Bullia, I worked in that Bullia district for about 4 or 5 years, and a lot of characters out there. And one old fella, he come into town to buy a present for his wife for Christmas present to Donohue's store. Anyway, he's there saying, he said, I got to buy a Cliffy Donohue. I got to buy a bra for me missus, he said. And Cliffy said, "Oh, well, what size bra you going to buy for the old girl?" Oh, he said, "Size 14. He said, "Jesus Christ." He said, "Size 14. He said, "Where did you get that size from? How'd you work it out?" He pulled his old Acubra out off his head and said, "Well," he said, "this one's a size 7. He said, "Just fits over one of them nicely." He said.
Keep them rolling, TJ. The properties they're flowing thick and fast here in Nambour.
Now, this one's a bit more of a historic sort of a yarn, but when I was head stockman on Coorabooka Station in 1972, I had a great old fella, Mick McDonald, who was a great uncle of a mate of mine, Ted Middleton's. Mick McDonald had a lot of good old true bush yarns. And he said he brought up at Tipperburra there, and he was travelling for the first time on a stagecoach going to Broken Hill to go to school. Old Mick, he said he got in the coach and he said, "There's this old Sheila sitting there beside him, all dressed up." He said, with these big boots on, a big flash hat. He said, and feathers in it. He said, "Oh, I could hardly look at her." He said, "Oh, she looked too fierce for me even to talk to." He said, so he said, "We're going along," and as they did in those days, the stagecoach, they'd pull up for a toilet stop and ladies to the left, gents to the right. And this old girl said to Mick, "Well, sonny, I best get out and splash me boots," she said. There she got. He said, "Well, she's not a bad old Sheila after all." He said, "We had a good old yarn," he said, "on the way to Broken Hill." He said, "She's a pretty good old stick," he said. Yeah.
Keep them rolling,
Oh,
TJ.
no, mate, keep them there. Knuckles, I'll keep them rolling. When I was at Coorabooka Station there, they used to have a 6:45, the old chatter channel. And all the stations would call up and say what was going on. The mail truck had been through or whatever. And it was getting up towards Christmas time, and I was relieving manager there at Coorabooka. And there's a fellow by name of Arthur Statham's. He used to run the show, call all the stations. And he called up this old fellow, had a squeaky voice, lived to the south of there. And he said, "What's the news down there?" He said, "Well, I heard last night that someone got 2 inches. And old Arthur Statham said, "Yes, Step. I think it was the cook on Marion Downs." There was silence for about 5 minutes. No one was game to say anything about that. So, okay, how are we going there?
Yeah, good. I reckon. What about the old Minmin Light, TJ? You got that fellow written down?
Oh, yeah, the old Minmin Light. I got plenty of Minmin Light stories. No old...
What about the first time you've seen the Minmin Light? That might be it's not as funny, but it's a proper true yarn for a few people out there.
True yarn. I was on Brunette Down Station at Stock Camp. It was about 22 men in the camp.
But I'll just interrupt you, TJ. For everyone out there who doesn't know what the Minmin Light is, just a little bit of a quick.
Okay. A Minmin Light is a light that appears in that country, Western, actually right around Australia, really, mostly on the East Coast, and originated in that Boulia district. And there was an old Minmin Hotel between Middleton and Boulia in Western Queensland there, and this light was first sighted around there. And a lot of history was they thought it was the old lady that had the Minmin Hotel. She died, and a lot of people believed it was the ghost of the Minmin. But it's a light that's seen by truckies, drovers, ringers, bloody station owners. A lot of people in that country, you see it at distances, long way away. Sometimes you see it up close. Well, this particular night, I walked from the stock camp over to have a cup of coffee with a contractor there, Ron Kerr and his wife. Very famous, well-written up contract musterer, come from Burralula, Ronnie Kerr. And we sat over there and we had a cup of coffee and told a few yarns about droving and that. And walking back to the camp, me and a fellow by the name of Dick Dodson. And we're walking along, and all of a sudden this light appeared in front of us, about 20 feet in front of us, about chest level, I suppose, about a foot across, I suppose. Yellowy sort of a funny sort of a light, but shone on us. But it didn't shine round us. We knew there was no one there, this is the middle of nowhere.
In what year would that been, Dad?
That was 1972. 1972 it was. And We just about shit ourselves. Whether it was the Holy Ghost or something spiritual come to take us away, aliens, we didn't know what the hell it was. Christ, we just took off. Away we went. And when we got to the camp, when we took off, it took off to the north of us. And when we got to the camp, which is a couple 300 yards away, which we ran in about 4 seconds, we woke everybody up and to show them this Minmin Light. But by this time, it had got down to the creek and was just following this creek around, just following. You could still see it clearly, but it was only a little light then. But definitely there is a Minmin Light in that backcountry, and that was a proper true story. First time I saw it, and I had to change my jocks as well.
That's straight up. Yeah, fuck that. I would have been gone. You only had to beat the other fella back to the camp down. He's fucking wheeling. Because wasn't there an old fella or something got shot in that country too?
Yeah, no, this is that was during wartime between the Jara and probably the territory border there. In those days, after the Japanese bombed Darwin, they evacuated hundreds of thousands of cattle from the territory and they drove them down into Queensland. And there was one drover after the other following each other. And out in that tableland country, it was sort of clear, open downs country. And there was a camp cook. He left one camp and he's walking back to the next drover, left one drover's camp. And he had a light with him. And these drovers and ringers, they were looking out and they seen this light coming. And it's getting closer and closer, closer. And this is about midnight. Then gone a bit closer and it's the Minmin Light. It's the Minmin Light. We're going to have to bloody shoot it. It's getting too close. So one of the drovers grabbed a 303 rifle and he aimed it at this Minmin Light. Bang, shot it. Light went out. So they're too frightened to go out until daylight. They thought, shit, what is it? Is it an alien, a ghost, or what? Wait, we're not going to go out there now. It might grab us. Anything could happen. So daylight came, they snuck out. Here's this poor old camp cook, shot through the bloody, straight through the chest. He was dead on the ground beside his bloody torch. This poor old fella, he's stone dead. They thought he was a Minmin Light, poor old bloke.
Hell.
Did that really fucking happen? Are you fucking kidding me? That's unreal.
There's this river bloke called Knuckles, some call him the Big Knuck, spinning stories tall and true that'll make you say,
Holy fuck!
The cities to the outback, on the highway or the farm, crack a cold one with Knuckles and
Tell us a proper true yarn.